This is episode 219 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it's been another exciting week here in New Mexico politics and policy. And of course, as we so often these days lead off our shows, it involves the governor's latest pronouncements involving COVID-19, etc. And I guess the main takeaways I had from her press conference last week were, one, she kind of calmed down maybe her scolding a little bit. She didn't wag her finger and tell us we were all naughty little children. She did extend the lockdown for another 30 days. And quietly, ironically, she seems like one of those people that would rather give you the bad news and then not really talk about the good news. But there's actually good news involving the orders, the health orders we're under. Studio gyms, and I've talked about my wife's Pilates many times, they're allowed to open now 25%. I don't know upon what data or what wild hair the governor caught and decided that 25% opening for Pilates and yoga studios is A-okay now. Maybe that's why she's being quiet about it. And the other one is, at last, wineries are open. So if you prefer your alcohol in the form of processed grape as opposed to processed hops and malt,
malted barley, hops.
Yes, you're now able to do that outdoors, etc. So I don't know. I know you think a lot about these these things, as every New Mexican is pondering these situations. So.
Well, I got a lot of feedback from a couple of, I thought, minor comments I made on an earlier podcast, and that had to do with basically coming up with broad rules of operation, not cutting it so fine, because that's where all this weirdness happens. You know, why would a brewery need to be open instead of a winery? I'm not sure we're going in that direction. You know, it's cutting it pretty close again to say, Pilates studios 25%. But I guess that a lot of other retail establishments are at a 25% that are in the non-essential category, I believe. Right. So I think there's some progress being made, and then, as this thing goes on and on and on, one of the things that just keeps occurring to me, and basically it occurred to me in the first week of the kind of broad shutdowns across the country, is this thing may be with us for a long time. And the idea about flattening the curve was perhaps a good one, perhaps not. But the whole thing about, we can only open up and have an economy when we have contact tracing and a effective vaccine, those two things together may never come. Yeah. And so if you're holding out for that, you may have another thing coming in. So it's going to be, how do we work through this? And so I've been seeing a lot of news reports about, maybe this will be with us forever, according to the great Dr. Fauci, the all-knowing and powerful Oz of COVID-19. But, there are a lot of issues going around. And, we've been talking longer than most about maybe this is something that, keeping the economy going is not going to be an optional thing. We can't wait until, quote, this is over. It may never be over.
Yeah. Is it over? Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?
No, and it's not over now.
Sorry. Yes. And by the way, if you think I don't know my history, just look up Animal House.
Animal House reference, good one.
Yes. Anyway, more on the order itself. What she did, Governor Lujan Grisham, that is, much of the press conference when she was actually talking, was to complain about Washington, which in her iteration means the president and Republican Senate, and their lack of action on another stimulus package. Here we are in the first week of August. We said on the last podcast that the enhanced unemployment benefits would go away at the end of July. They are gone, at least in theory, right now. The federal government has ways of doing retroactive
Yeah.
payments. They feel like, why not spend more money? But for now, at least, there has been no action in the Senate on the stimulus, bailout, whatever you want to call it. It's just a big barrel of spending. The HEROES Act, which did pass the House, is $3.1 trillion. Now, that's DOA in the Senate, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to get something out of the Senate. It is the position of the Rio Grande Foundation that we've had enough debt already and that the governors need to reopen their states, including our own governor, because all we're doing right now is piling up insane amounts of indebtedness on the federal credit card. We're up to, I checked the U.S. debt clock. You can find this information on Heirs of Enchantment and other locations. We're at $26.5 trillion and rising very rapidly. The HEROES Act is $3.1 trillion. It's just out of control right now, and there are going to be real repercussions. But we did a post over at Heirs of Enchantment, our problematic federalism and MLG's pleas for another bailout. It got a lot of traction and continues to get a lot of traction because the issue we're dealing with is that the states are making their COVID-19 policies, they're making their lockdown policies, and then they're running off to the federal government for the financial wherewithal to keep these policies going. And it really is a messed up system when you, as a state governor, can largely avoid the economic repercussions of the lockdown policies that you have implemented. And on one final point on that is that we saw gross receipts tax revenues come in just a little bit under where they were a year ago. 1.7%, I think the Albuquerque Journal reported, down, which is next to nothing. And this has to be largely related to the federal money that's floating around out there. And of course, Governor Lujan Grisham and other governors, many of them Democrats, some of them Republicans across the country, are hoping for that money to flow through to kind of cushion them against the policies that they've implemented. And you can't shut down the economy forever. It's simple as that.
Yeah, and a couple quick points. Author Amity Shlaes talked about this weird form of federalism where the feds send the states the money and then the states divvy it out. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing that. And then the other thing about COVID relief is the United States debt has a credit rating just like any other debt, and Fitch Investor Service did a negative a negative watch on the AAA rating of the U.S. debt, and so you can spend more money than you take in. That has been proven to the tune of getting close to $25 trillion, give or take a few trillion. But there can come a point where you keep running $2, $3, $4, $5 trillion deficits per year. You do that in a few years, you could find the United States in a world of hurt economically from a dollar point of view, what it would mean to our economy.
Yeah, and the governor, of course, is pointing her finger at Washington and the Republicans in Washington. We posted a tweet, but you could watch the press conference yourself. Obviously, when you get partisanship in Washington, D.C., months before an election in a fraught situation like this one, we at the Rio Grande Foundation totally sympathize with people who are unable to get back to work, whether it's because their business is closed because of just maybe they worked for a buffet restaurant and that is kind of a model that suddenly shifted in a different direction, or because the governor has said, no, you can't reopen this business. Whatever it may be, we appreciate and are sensitive to your pain. However, that doesn't mean that it follows that Washington, D.C. should go and bring more debt and more printed money to the party. The states should have responsibility. If you're going to institute a lockdown, you should be the one putting some money in people's pockets, bringing some financial recompense, some kind of solution to bear, not just, hey, Washington, we've locked our economy down and now no one has any money. It's up to you, Daddy Warbucks, to figure it out. That's just not a very sound system or a logical approach to things. And it doesn't have very good incentives inherent in it as well.
No, and in the administration in Santa Fe, as they're doling out this money that comes from Washington, they are very quick to take credit for, here is money we are giving you. Mm-hmm. And I suppose that's factually correct. Paul, if I give you $100 and you give $100 to somebody else, it's like, who gave it? Who gave them the money? It was Paul. But in this case, where the other big question is, where did that money come from? And it came from the not even literal printing presses, but the cyber printing presses in Washington, creating money out of thin air.
No doubt about it. And I thought you were going to make a rob Peter to pay Paul joke there, Wally.
No, Paul was giving money away. So Paul was the payee in this example.
If you want to rob Peter to pay me, go for it.
Paul was just the intermediary. I'll have to clean up my my analogy next time.
All right. Well, speaking of federal stimuli or packages to bail out states in the COVID-19, there's the CARES Act, which is a massive spending bill passed in Washington, D.C. several months ago. It was one of the stimuli, so to speak. And whether you support the CARES Act or don't, it's irrelevant at this point. The fact is that the Trump administration had put language into the bill that provided some of the dollars that were going to education to private educational providers. Now, of course, as we all know, a vast majority of money and a vast majority of funding in the United States goes to government-owned and operated educational institutions. But as we saw, the CARES Act and other economic stimuli had some money for private businesses because they'd been shut down, and schools have been in the same boat. And our guest on Thursday is the executive director of Estancia Valley Classical Academy, which is a charter school, but we talk about different educational options. And private schools have been impacted by COVID-19 and the policies of COVID-19, just like everybody else. And so there's a lawsuit that has been filed, Michigan versus DeVos, Betsy DeVos being President Trump's education secretary, and states including Michigan, including New Mexico, our own Attorney General Hector Balderas, have either signed on to this lawsuit or filed a lawsuit that essentially says, we believe that all the money should go to the public schools and the private schools are left hanging out to dry. Our amicus brief, which we filed with a number of other organizations, says no, private schools should be eligible for some of these dollars as well. And we'll see how these cases go, but it's very in line with New Mexico politics, especially Hector Balderas and the folks running the show in Santa Fe, that if there is money floating around, dang it, it should go to government and government only. How dare any private institution try to get a part of that, no matter how negatively they've been impacted by policies handed down out of Santa Fe.
Yeah, and I think they probably ought to be a little bit careful at the Attorney General's office in New Mexico, because the federal government doesn't exactly have the anti-donation clause like New Mexico has. And a lot of the arguments that they're using against these other entities from the feds could just as easily apply to the bulk of the state budget and state operations for states that are spendthrift and end up wanting money to keep programs going that they don't that they're unable to fund themselves. So yeah, this is a probably makes good politics, but I'm not sure it makes good policy. And I'm not sure it's even good for a state like New Mexico that's definitely on the long side of receiving funds from Washington.
Yeah, and you know, the fact is that the anti-donation clause, unfortunately, while enacted with the best of intentions of keeping public dollars, so to speak, out of private hands in the form of subsidies, we know from the film industry and from LEDA, local economic development, grants, and other forms of corporate welfare in this state that the anti-donation clause is completely toothless, except for when the already powerful special interests, i.e., the unions, teachers' unions, and others, want to bring it up to stop public dollars from going to private educational institutions. So
It's like a barrier, Paul, but instead of a piece of plastic or glass, it's kind of like one of those cheap volleyball nets we used to have in PE in high school. Water can pass through that when they want it to. It doesn't take much, does it?
yeah, it's the problem with politics is that the powerful special interest groups, in especially New Mexico, they tend to get their way regardless of what the rule is on paper. And we've seen this repeatedly with a number of issues over the years. The anti-donation clause being intended exactly as a prophylactic against those kinds of corporate welfare, economic, payments to businesses, specific businesses, and then it actually there's an exemption specifically included in the anti-donation clause in the last 15, 20 years that's then enough to drive a truck through. So unfortunately, all that remains is prohibitions on education dollars, pretty much. So speaking of businesses and, an overwhelming, I'm sure there's polling somewhere out there, Wally, about restaurants and their views on the governor's lockdown orders. Maybe you have some data at your fingertips, but, it's worth doing the story. KOB, Channel 4, KOB TV, interviewed one restaurant owner who says the governor's doing a great job and supports the indoor dining ban. He just so happens to have a tiny staff and an outdoor patio
And a paid for building.
in a paid-for building. Yeah, so a lot of
And
advantages there.
and a lot of inherited money. And
Right.
there's lots of things that are going his way, which is good.
And kind of the man bites dog situation, which is why news often is skewed in ways that you, as the viewer of the news, don't really get a understanding of the real picture of the world. But this one restaurant owner supports the governor and says she's doing a great job. Now, they could do a different story every night on all the restaurant owners that are livid with what the governor is doing. And there's been a number of stories covering protests and people speaking out and even disobeying the governor's orders. But it's worth talking about. And, I don't know if you've seen any data out there in terms of restaurants and what the actual feelings of restaurant owners are, but it's clearly one of the industries that's been most heavily impacted by the governor and her decisions.
Yeah, without a doubt, it is been dramatically impacted. And there are, this is not the only restaurant who takes the position that the governor is doing the exact right thing. But I do think it tends to be what your situation is. Let's face it, there are a lot of hardworking people that their restaurant is their only source of net income, their primary asset from a wealth point of view, and the only employment for all or most of their family. And then there's others where it is an industry that attracts people sometimes that make money in one industry and then go into another one, a lot like the philanthropy business. So, it depends where you come from, what you think, but it's the same issue that ask quote unquote non-essential small businesses, whatever the wedding dress shops that were forced to close, about what they think of the policy relative to a state government employee that got to stay at home and maybe not have to do nearly as much work, but still got a fair a full paycheck. So there's a lot of things swirling around there, and so it really does. I do think really can depend a lot on where you sit. And the other thing is that we just got over 1% of our population on the books as having coronavirus, COVID-19 symptoms. They were promising that 50% of people were going to have it, a lot of the models way back when we did the shutdown. So there's no one saying that it's not bad. There's no one that's saying that it's not something to be addressed, to be dealt with. But it's also not necessarily, this isn't 1918. This is 2020. Things are a lot different now. And so, yeah, we're going to have to see. And then back to the point I made at the beginning of the show is this may be with us for a long time. And if you're waiting for a clean break where it's just magically gone and you don't have to worry about it as a public policymaker, that may be a long time in the future.
No doubt about it. Well, there are isolated businesses, and every business, if you put a government policy in place that directly benefits them, you can probably find that business or others that support that particular government policy. I'm sure the breweries that were able to open with outdoor patios, they probably saw a nice business uptick. My wife and I had a little date night at a local golf course, which has a restaurant. They have a big tent set up right near one of the putting greens. It's Paradise Hills Golf Course. And boy, on a Friday, Saturday night, it is the place to be, let me tell you. They have a lot of outdoor seating, and I'm confident that not nearly as many people were going out for a Friday, Saturday night at the local golf course. But boy, you shut down most other restaurant options, and suddenly you are in business if you run the restaurant at Paradise Hill. So good for them. At least those folks aren't publicly saying, yeah, keep everybody else shut down. And you have to respect business owners that may be benefiting from policy X, Y, or Z that is not going out and trying to push for those. Golf courses are one. The Albuquerque Journal had a good chart a couple weeks ago showing just how high the amount of play had been at some of these local golf courses because there's limited recreational opportunities. And a lot of the golf courses are municipally owned, so they don't really care one way or the other. Yeah. But Paradise Hills is it is a privately owned golf course, and even though it's open to the public, and yeah, they're doing great business both in the restaurant area and as well on the course itself.
Yeah, you're the second person I heard about the Paradise outdoor restaurant being a big thing in terms of the place to go. And the other thing is not all restaurants are created equal. If you do a big drive-through business or you're in a food category that people traditionally have done carry out, pizza, Chinese food are two that come to mind, you're in a whole different position than somebody that is a boutique fine dining restaurant that is, has to have their bar open and, because they made money on the bar before you drank. And, it's not the sort of thing where people get, $75 dinners to go as much as they do lower costs. So, yeah, there's a whole lot of things in it. It just reminded me of one of the great ones of Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. And it's one of those that, sometimes if you're on the receiving end of a policy that the source of that came from a lot of people, you think that policy is great. It doesn't hurt you. Yeah. But if you're one of the ones being nickeled and dimed, and in the case of COVID, sometimes a lot more than that, you may have a way different opinion of it. So,
no doubt about it. And it's just a very different world at some of these drive-through places with the opportunity to do outdoor dining. Rio Grande Foundation's offices are downtown, and downtown, we don't have wide sidewalks. This isn't Paris or Rome where you have huge outdoor plazas where you can have tables and chairs and tents and the whole 9 yards outdoors. So of all the other things that make downtown Albuquerque dreary, depressed, and ugly as the homeless guy said in the Albuquerque Journal a couple months ago. The lack of people being able to go downtown and eat in a restaurant, because there are some nice places down in downtown Albuquerque, but they really realistically can't open. I mean, that's if you have the cojones, so to speak, to sit outside at a outdoor dining venue in downtown Albuquerque, because I can only imagine how many folks would of the local clientele would be down there harassing you if you go out and do that kind of thing. It just the difference is very stark. So it's some people might benefit, but most of us are losing out, and that's just the reality. Let's move on to another topic near and dear to our hearts, maybe not as near as restaurants, but electricity generation in our lovely state is another critical thing that we all rely on. And we were recording the podcast a little bit earlier.
When there was a power failure.
Yeah. Now, I posted this on August the 3rd, 2020, and we record on that day. That it's a Monday.
Any comments you made were after the power failure, not a result of.
That is true.
Well, unless you believe in time travel, and then maybe they can do time travel through these electric wires.
My comments were written before
okay.
the power went out. And the reason being that the Public Regulation Commission of New Mexico voted for the 100% renewable option, and PNM in their case, their brief, the Energy Transition Act passed a few years ago, January 2019, or that session, and there was a whole array of different proposals on how you implement it. The ETA did not require 100% renewable, but the PRC has gone and done that. So PNM in the rate case said we need to go transition through natural gas and other traditional fuel sources on the way to this renewable future in a couple of decades. PRC says, no, we're going to go right ahead and go straight to 100% renewables. PNM says reliability will suffer. And here's just a few quotes, and I know, Wally, you work on this issue. PNM spokesperson Ray Sandoval told New Mexico Political Report, natural gas, this is a quote, is a necessary component of its transition to renewables because it offers backup reliability to help protect against grid failures when renewables may not be able to perform. That's something that we've talked about. And then another article.
It's not may not be able to perform. It's will not be able to perform, because one thing we know about solar is that only happens during the day. That's the definition of solar. And yes, there are a lot of batteries, but New Mexico is getting on the leading and soon to be bleeding edge of battery technology in terms of how many we need as a state. We're going to have some of the largest battery projects in the world at the rate things are going.
Yep.
So
energy analyst Thomas Conroy, he highlighted two risks associated with 100% renewables. A rapid increase of renewables onto PNM's system at a rate that he said has not occurred before, and relying on battery storage. So he said, we are going to go from 7% renewables to 30% renewables in 3 years. And then he says, if New Mexico suffers blackouts, it will become extremely ugly extremely quickly, Conroy said. Hint, hint, crystal ball right there. So, I know you've been working on this issue. I know that there are some parties involved that at least have more positive view of the outcomes at the PRC, but share with us, Wally, what you know about the situation.
Well, and it is one of those where PNM believed that the best way for them to go forward in their filings was to add some renewables, but add natural gas generation for the reasons you outlined. It's reliable, it can run whenever you want, and then interestingly, it's easier than coal or nuclear to ramp up or ramp down. There is the project in the Four Corners region to add carbon capture
Right.
to San Juan Generating Station.
Enchant Energy.
Enchant Energy. So if that project goes through, you would have a source of very reliable energy, not natural gas in this case, coal, but with that carbon capture technology added on, it would actually produce way less carbon dioxide per megawatt hour, even compared to natural gas, 70 or 80% less, depending on the type of natural gas generation. So a lot of things are going on. And, we've seen issues up to now for the meager amount of renewables that are on the system, 5, 6, 7%. But yeah, we will be doing a grand experiment here in the next few years. And if the batteries work fantastically, cost effectively, everything works well, I think that there's a chance that it won't be a disaster. But, these batteries are, they have a history. You know what I mean? There's a big battery project in Arizona that it was working well until it caught on fire and burned.
And they've had those problems with batteries and Teslas. They've had those
Yeah.
battery issues on board airplanes. I think some laptops or some kind of mechanism they were using on airplanes had caught fire as well.
Yeah, because batteries are a chemical, they're not like
Not the most green thing in the world
well,
either.
yeah. Oh, and yeah, don't even start me on that. But yeah, there are a lot of issues and a lot of challenges. And batteries at this point, I would be very concerned. It reminds me a little bit of food. Like if you have a great dish where I make 2 quarts of this fantastic dish and I'm going to produce it in a food factory, you can't just always take the same scale and scale it up. Things change at larger scale. And the history of batteries around the world has been things have changed. And we're going to get to see how they change in New Mexico based on what just happened at the PRC.
And we've had folks from Enchant Energy on the show. We're generally sympathetic to their cause of trying to take the power plant, the San Juan Generating Station, and institute carbon sequestration technology. For them, this decision by the PRC does benefit them initially and directly by because PNM's alternative, one of them involved a natural gas facility or significant investment in natural gas facility right there by San Juan Generating Station. So having that space left open actually helps keep the coal-fired power plant viable, moving forward. So that's
And the PRC commissioners all spoke to that as
Right.
being a positive of the plan that they just adopted. Is it doesn't guarantee that Enchant Energy gets to go forward, but they certainly still gives them the opportunity.
It removes an obstacle that
Yes.
might otherwise have arisen. Now, the really fun and creative thought experiment is the coal-fired power, of course, down the road, carbon sequestered, all that kind of stuff. So very green. PNM has been pretty adversarial to Enchant Energy and their general plight. However, for this merchant plant, it would be merchant by that meaning it's not contracted to any specific provider, whether it's PNM or some other provider of electricity. There could be a scenario down the road if the battery thing and the renewable thing doesn't quite work out as well as PNM is hoping it will, where PNM could be first in line to say, hey, we need this power coming off of this power plant here at the San Juan Generating Station. They've said that they will never, ever buy that power ever again. But I could easily see where PNM hits a crisis situation. Things aren't working out as well as they'd hoped. And oh, by the way, there's this old power plant that they used to own that's providing very reliable, relatively cheap power.
Yeah, and the thing that makes the carbon capture project work, and I really am not one of those that says, well, P&M should have done that. Their cost benefit, the industry and how they operate as a regulated utility, it was just frankly, a bridge way too far for them to risk putting in carbon capture, how they are a regulated utility. But with this thing called the 45Q tax credit, that's a lot like wind and solar credits that have been put in over the years to encourage new technology by the feds, it makes it a whole different ballgame. And so, again, it's back to batteries. How good are these batteries going to be? Because if they're not stellar and don't continue to make rapid improvements and rapid decreases in their costs, you're going to have something else. And that's either going to be nuclear, natural gas, or coal, or hydro. But, let's face it, we're not adding any more hydro anywhere. So it's really those first three, nuclear or nuclear, depending on if you're GW Bush, coal, coal and natural gas. Those are the only ones that can stabilize the grid for the foreseeable future. And and again, even P&M said, and in promoting its marketing materials before all of this recent thing before the PRC, is that yeah, they didn't necessarily know which technology was going to be there on the total renewable side. That's why they proposed natural gas. So
Yeah, and not that the Rio Grande Foundation endorses these federal subsidies, whether they're for wind, whether they're for solar, or even for clean coal, as we're talking about. I think if it works, it will be very clean coal. But we'd like to get away from a monopolistic government top-down utility situation to begin with, institute more competitiveness, a market, not have government officials micromanaging our power supply and what sources it comes from. So we are a long way away from where the Rio Grande Foundation would want to go here in New Mexico. And if this federal tax credit makes it viable to keep San Juan Generating Station open using carbon sequestration technology, which could be, if it does work, an incredible boon, not just for the Four Corners, but for the entire country. I mean, this, if it does work and it has, especially getting beyond the subsidy situation, because that's, to be fair, that's what you can argue subsidies make sense for, is to get a nascent industry up and going and then pull those subsidies back over time. We've had renewables for 100, 200, over in Holland, they've had them for 300-400 years. And we know that renewables require massive subsidies and massive mandates in order to work. So we're not thrilled about those policies coming out of Washington, but if it's going to help New Mexico, it's going to help the Four Corners. Might as well take advantage of the situation.
yeah, and then you talked about a thought experiment, the one that I've challenged people to turn more than just a thought experiment. And you pick the number. I say 15,000. I would give you credit for 5,000. 5,000 homes. Segregate it from the grid, put in the best renewable and batteries that you can, and demonstrate on a small scale how that works.
Yeah.
What that reminds me of a lot of is the federalism argument that the states should be incubators of good policy. And so instead of do things like the Affordable Health Care Act, where we impose this unknown thing on everybody, let the states experiment a little and see what works the best before you take it. I think that is totally lacking. So we are doing the equivalent of experimental surgery and experimental drug therapy on a living patient, in this case, the electric grid of the United States. And I would love to see that hypothetical turned into a real situation. Show us how it works on a small scale. Yep. I would be the first, literally, to say, yes, we're ready to take this statewide, nationwide, and worldwide. But right. They never do that. So,
and now for the bad news portion of our program. Alas, Marathon Petroleum has just announced that they are permanently closing a 26,000 barrel a day refinery near Gallup, New Mexico. And boy, as if Gallup wasn't in tough enough shape already, they have a coal-fired power plant and now a refinery that was shuttered by COVID-19 and the precipitous drop in gasoline and petroleum consumption. This facility, Marathon said it was its decision was made because of the 16 refiners they have, it was one of the highest cost facilities. There's another one, 166,000 barrel a day facility in Martinez, California. So that's two facilities they are shuttering. Remember, just last week we talked about the production of oil in New Mexico, and how that's dropped dramatically. This is the other end of that situation, and that's going to hurt your tax base. I mean, there's not a ton of people employed at a given refinery operation, but the jobs that are there are high-paying jobs, and you're dealing with a lot of economic base value created by these facilities. So that's going to be another blow to Gallup, New Mexico, and quite frankly, a blow to the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And these that refinery would be served to the best of my knowledge from the San Juan Basin. The liquids coming out of that, which is not huge and a little bit shaky. The thing that's definitely bad news for the Gallup region. The thing that's good news in my mind for the state of New Mexico is how close we are. We're at half of the drilling rigs operating compared to the state of Texas, all in the Permian Basin. The Permian Basin is the best place to get oil. The final thought is that.
So hold on, you're saying that we're still in relatively good shape in New Mexico
as a state because of the Permian,
right?
But the San Juan Basin definitely hurting, and then the other
which is
thing,
natural gas,
which is more natural gas, but they're liquids. That's what they were refining in all likelihood at Marathon. And then the other thing is there's times when the refining business is very, very profitable, but over the long term, that's a very thin margin, requires a high degree of efficiency, not unlike the restaurant industry. And so to see some of the, what would you say, more costly, less profitable plants being shut down in this current time, that's not too, not surprising, but it is just sad that it's the one by Gallup. So,
yeah. And who knows, maybe somebody could purchase it and use it as petroleum consumption rebounds, but who knows? I mean, they were looking at the predictions for the future, and they're saying, it's not going to rebound for the foreseeable future. I mean, aviation is completely flat on its back still. Motorists and people out driving. I've been in a few more rush hour or other traffic jams than I had been in a while, but it's really minimal still on the streets here in Albuquerque, and I'm sure across the country. And his home officing is working remotely going to be the wave of the future, and I think they looked at all that. Also, in closing news, Alsup's, the famous New Mexico convenience store, is closing their Clovis headquarters operation. I think they said they had something like 19 employees. Clovis is, it's a slow-growing, challenged community. Alsup's is a very well-known New Mexico name. 18 people. I'm sorry. And, it's not unexpected when Alsup's went through a ownership change that was on the chopping block, but they've officially announced that they are closing the headquarters. Now, I'm sure their stores are not only going to be kept open, at least when they're profitable, but expanded and improved and made nicer, and that'll be good. But those headquarters are vanishingly rare in New Mexico, and Alsup's was a pretty big outfit.
Yeah, they're vanishingly rare for multi-state operations because New Mexico does not have a lot of good underlying law and tax policy to encourage headquarters. And you know what? No offense to my friends and associates in Clovis. If you woke up in the middle of the day and said, what's the best place to have a headquarters in New Mexico or the Western United States, Clovis would be pretty far down the list. It's nothing against it, but, it's not surprising. As you said, they went through an ownership change, and I certainly don't know the details, but, a lot of times when things happen, the new owners say, you know what, maybe I will maybe I'll live in Ruidoso and have our headquarters there. It's a little cooler. There's pine trees. You never know how those things work
Not
out.
many HQs in Ruidoso either,
But
unfortunately.
that's that
Yeah,
state problem.
yeah,
But even if you're going to have to be in New Mexico, maybe you're somewhere else. So
yeah. The article from the Eastern New Mexico News cites Yes Way, not No Way, but Yes Way is currently based in Iowa and is establishing a new headquarters in Fort Worth, home of zero income tax, right to work, all the advantages of being located in the Lone Star State, which so many other businesses already take advantage of. Well, folks, we are going to leave things right there. Another exciting week in New Mexico politics and policy. We'll see what the dog days of summer have in store. But at this rate, it seems like we're going to be full throttle here through Election Day at least. And thanks for listening to this week's show. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing to Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter. And tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.